Now come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, Honorable City Council, to our mayor and our city treasurer, to our city clerk in our absence, to our city attorney, our chief of staff, administrative staff here in the council chambers, to our audience here in the council chambers, and those viewing via our broadcast channel and YouTube Live. Welcome to the City of Romulus City Council regular meeting. Today is Monday, April 1st, 2024. Members of the public wishing to participate in this meeting may do so under the public comment portion of the agenda. Please fill out a request to speak public comment card located on the table in the back of the chambers and hand it to me, the deputy clerk. And at this time, we will have roll call. Councilwoman Abdo. Here. Councilman Barden.
Here.
Councilwoman Roscoe.
Here.
Councilwoman Talley.
Here.
Councilman Wadsworth.
Here.
Councilwoman Williams.
Here.
And Councilman Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, there is a quorum for tonight's regular meeting.
Thank you.
The regular meeting agenda is as follows. Number one, agenda, 2 minutes, 3 petitioner, 4 chairperson's report, 5 mayor's report, 6 clerk's report, 7 treasurer's report, 8 public comment, 9 unfinished business, 10 new business, 11 communication, and number 12 is adjournment, and a motion will be in order to accept tonight's regular meeting agenda as presented.
So moved to accept the regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Support.
It's been motioned by Ms. Talley, supported by Ms. Abdo for approval of the agenda as presented. Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved.
Thank you, City Council. Agenda item 2A for approval are the minutes from the regular meeting held on Monday, March 25th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we approve the regular minutes from the council meeting that was held on March 25th at 7:30.
I second that motion.
It's been motioned by Mr. Wadsworth, supported by Ms. Talley for approval of the minutes from our regular meeting held on Monday, March the 25th at 7:30. Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved.
Thank you, City Council. Agenda item 2B for approval are the minutes from the special meeting study session held on Monday, March 25th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. for a presentation regarding the city's infrastructure.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we approve the minutes for the special meeting that was held on Monday, March 25th at 6:30 p.m.
I second that motion.
Been motioned by Mr. Wadsworth, supported by Ms. Talley for approval of the minutes from our special meeting study session held on Monday, the 25th of March at 6:30 for a presentation regarding the city infrastructure. Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that motion is approved.
Thank you, City Council. Agenda item 3 is petitioner. We do have one petitioner's request, which is a special land use request from Romulus Distribution Center located at 36711 Ecorse Road. And here to present his petition is Kyle Morton from Ashley Capital.
Good evening to the council. Kyle Morton from Ashley Capital. I'm our Vice President of Development. So I know this project's been in front of council several times. I think this is our 5th time here. So we're going to run through a few of the changes, talk about what's changed since the past meeting where we had this presented. And also there was some additional information and questions that were asked at the previous meeting that we didn't have in the slides. We weren't anticipating covering, largely environmental related. And I'll turn that over to Mark Quimby on our team to address those slides and talk about some of that information. So just having this slide up to confirm exactly where we're talking about on Ecorse Road. And the overall site assemblage is outlined in red. The yellow area is the conservation easement that Eagle Conservation easement put in place by the city of Romulus. That was done when the city owned the land. So I know we've been here a few times, but there's a few new people in the audience. So who is Ashley Capital? We're a private held real estate company. We specialize in large light industrial buildings. This year will be 40 years for the company. Our largest footprint is in Michigan, in Metro Detroit. We specialize in what we call bulk warehouse buildings. So buildings that are over 500,000 feet is our target. So why this site is exciting to us is because we're able to do what we specialize in, and a combination of that, but we focus on brownfield sites. So this is a complex brownfield site. And then we also have had a long-standing relationship in the city of Romulus. It's almost 30 years dating back to the project we did on Van Born Road. So happy to build on that relationship. All right, so why are we looking at this site? How did we come in control of this site? And why is this project proposed here? So many of you will remember about 4 years ago, we own over 500 acres at the intersection of Vining and Wick Road, across the street from the North Point project. When that project was moving forward and coming through council, we said, hey, if they're gonna do it, we'd like to do it on the other side of the street. And what we heard confidently from Planning Commission and council was, not here, not now. And so we looked to find another site. We found a site that's in the city that had the existing M1 zoning in place, that had zoning so we could do the project. The city happened to own, as this project stands, it's 284 acres. 222 is owned by the city of Romulus. So the city put out an RFP for this site. We were identified as the highest bidder. It was solicited as a only industrial project, only M1. So when the land was purchased from the city, it was our intention, and we always have said that this would be, we had, at the time it said 3 buildings, almost 2 million square feet of warehouse. So we were talking 700,000 foot buildings and 3 of them, right? So that was the plan we mentioned to council 4 years ago when we purchased the land. Overall, in that RFP, it said no access to Wick Road, which we have no access to Wick Road. We're maintaining access just to Ecorse Road. We have no access to the railroad. There's no rail-served buildings. And after the city's, actually, get the next slide. So after we purchased the land from the city in September of 2020, we then went and acquired the neighboring parcels. There was a 40-acre parcel to the front, which we often is referred to as the pallet farm. There was another 20-acre vacant field, and we also acquired 3 houses along Ecorse Road. So basically, it took us 3 years, it's now almost 4 years to get to this point, from the initial conversation with the city in terms of acquiring the property to the meeting today for the final special land use vote. Over the last few years, we've been to Planning Commission. We got Planning Commission approval. We've been to the Board of Zoning Appeals. We got Board of Zoning Appeals approval for 3 different items. We've been to council twice for the brownfield plan, which we got approved unanimously. And in that brownfield plan, we showed buildings of this size. They were 500,000 feet roughly, and we even showed a plan to take them to 1 million square feet. So in terms of this special land use request, this has always been Ashley Capital's intention to build these larger buildings. It has, since day one in 2020, we had shown that we intend to build these buildings. It was never the intention to build smaller buildings. So the big item on the right, which is in bold, is that on March 13th, we got our Eagle 381 work plan approved. I believe a copy of that work plan was provided in your packet, or a copy of the approval letter was in the packet. I'll let Mark touch on those in a little bit. So again, why does this need to go to council again? So special land use in the zoning ordinance for Romulus is for buildings that are over 80,000 feet. Our proposal for 2 buildings requires us to get council approval simply because it's over 80,000 feet. As a condition of that, we had to have a minimum of 50% additional setbacks and 50% more landscaping, which we met. We have met every comment that the city staff or third-party reviewers have given us, or we have exceeded those minimums. So our typical setback needed to be 75 feet from the property line. In this instance, we have no house. That's the closest house to the building is 1,000 feet. So these buildings in the special land use plan have been set back drastically further than they're required to be. Okay. So the two big changes that came out of since the previous meeting that has been at council. One is the 381 work plan that was conditionally approved. This was by Eagle and specifically relates to our environmental activities on the site. The due care activities were approved without conditions, which means we're able to start those activities. In the Eagle's eyes, those are completely safe, and everything that we've planned and outlined in the work plan has been approved. The items that were conditional were largely related to vapor intrusion mitigation design, which we just have not submitted to them yet. That'll be a requirement when the building's actually built and we go for a building permit, as well as our pre and post development monitoring plan. Mark will touch on that in a little bit. What we heard in the previous meeting is there needed to be more detail on what exactly we would be monitoring, and we'll touch on that in a little. And then the second item was, and there were some concerns about, additional concerns brought up about the school and the setback of the project from the school. There already is a fence in between the project and the school. It is not in great condition. So we have offered to replace the entire stretch of the fence that runs along the east line of the school it's from Wick up until where the tree line cuts in. And while we're replacing it with the new 8-foot fence, we're going to plant new evergreen trees behind it. So further buffering from the school, a new fence, as well as new trees on the other side of that. So those were on the plans that were resubmitted to the city. So the small circle with the red, small red circle, it looks minor. It's just the scale of the project. It's about an acre of area that we shifted over parking and are saving additional trees, so that'll be additional setback and green space, or additional tree space that's saved as part of the project. This is just a landscape version of that other site plan. As a reminder, we have a 4-foot berm around the entire perimeter of the site. This was added as part of the special land use. We'll have 2 rows of evergreen trees, 15 feet on center. So there's 1,400 trees that will be planted that surround the entire building. The closest house on Wick Road is 1,000 feet. The closest house to the east, in the subdivision to the east, past the railroad tracks, is 1,300 feet. And we don't have the dimension of the school setback here, but it's over 1,000 feet. I think it's 1,100 feet to the school. So I'm going to turn this over to Mark now to talk about environmental related items and start with the historic landfill slide.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go over, we didn't go over in as much detail last time since we covered it in the Brownfield presentation, but we wanted to refresh everything. So what you can see here is a 1966 and 1967 aerial photograph. It really captures the extent of the north and south landfill pretty well in terms of where they were located and what kind of things were going on. A large issue with building on a landfill is obviously the unconsolidated way, or the unorganized way that material is placed, because it's not placed in a way that's structural so you can build on it. So independent of all the environmental concerns, you also have significant structural concerns, so our plan would have to take that into account. And what I'd like to do is spend a little bit more time too talking about, the concept of cleanup around landfills and what there is, because there seems, some information was discussed, and it sounded like people were surprised when they heard that we weren't cleaning up the site the way they thought we were cleaning up the site. And so I wanted to kind of go back to the original brownfield plan that was approved and presented to council quite a while ago, about, I think it was about a year, maybe 2 years ago, and really talk about the idea that when you're dealing with a landfill, the way that you're typically going to address the contamination is capping. That is what the state wants you to do, because it's cost prohibitive to go in and try to like dig the entire thing out. And so we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that. And a big thing, though, is that when you have a site like this and it's in an uncontrolled manner, the issue is like the city doesn't have money to cap it, right? Eagle doesn't have money to cap it. They don't have a line item in their budget to go to orphan sites and just go and, you know, control a site like this. So that's what the brownfield program is really designed to do, is to find sites like this and then find a public-private partnership where you can bring in private dollars to basically do that type of capping, and then use the development to help offset those costs and to basically reimburse the private entity who's doing that work. And really, this has been successful across the state, and Michigan has really been at the forefront of brownfield redevelopment in the entire country, in Region 5 at the APA as well. So again, how can a site like this be redeveloped safely? The biggest thing is getting a comprehensive cap of the site, because typically what you're dealing with is you have contaminated soil, and then as it rains, you have water that can percolate through that contaminated soil and then basically, you know, accumulate and get into the groundwater. So one of the most important things on a site like this is controlling physical contact with the contamination, and then also controlling any kind of stormwater that hits it so it doesn't percolate through the ground. Because once it basically goes through the ground column and starts to mix with water, then it becomes what we call leachate, which is basically the contamination from the soil coming down into the groundwater. So the plan that we put together to redevelop the site safely is all focused around the concept of capping the landfill, controlling all the stormwater, and then making sure that any of the pipes that have to go into the ground are both watertight and chemically resistant. So if they ever did come into contact with contaminated groundwater, that groundwater can't get into the pipes and therefore then get into the actual stormwater system. And again, and then, you know, for the other types of things, like as Kyle briefly mentioned, there's a vapor barrier. So there is, you know, methane being produced from the organic, you know, deposition in the landfill. And that, you know, methane is an explosive gas, so that has to be controlled. So any of the buildings that are built on the site, any enclosed structure, would have incorporated within it a vapor mitigation system that would control that risk. And the issue is that on building on a site like this, you have to take into account, you know, how to manage all those risks, as well as the structural risks that I mentioned. And that's not really possible without a brownfield plan. But what's nice about the brownfield plan is that that also serves as the mechanism to cap the landfill. Because if you don't have the development that generates the tax dollars to be able to pay for those costs, then there's just no way to kind of get that whole process kick-started. And I guess the other point is, you know, well, why wouldn't we just come in and just do all this work and do the development? Well, the issue is that if you think about it, where the market is, when, you know, when someone's going, it's not that different than a house, but in the commercial market, when someone's looking for, you know, how much does it cost to rent space, right, to run a business? There's a market there, and that market doesn't take into account the cost to do all of these environmental activities. And if you had to bake all that into the cost, for us to be able to afford to do that work, we'd have to charge rents that no one could pay and no one would want, and so you're basically making a product so expensive it doesn't work, which is why it's all paired and combined as a cohesive plan with the brownfield plan, specifically to pair both the development and the environmental costs and the reimbursement of those costs, because they can't exist without each other. So high level, you know, what are the two main issues? The biggest two issues related to the buildings themselves is the structural support of the buildings and then the vapor mitigation system. So what we're showing here is just kind of basically what happens with what we call geopiers. And so what's really important about these is that it allows us to basically prepare the ground in a structural way without actually disturbing the ground that much in terms of pulling material up. So when we're dealing with a contaminated site like this, we don't want to like drill a hole and auger a bunch of soil to the surface, because then we're pulling all that contamination up to the surface. So instead what we do is we actually drill the opposite way, which they call reverse augering. And what that does, instead of pulling the soil up, it actually pushes it out. And so what you're doing is you're densifying the soil around where that hole is, and then you're filling the gap that you made with basically these kind of stone marshmallows. And what that does is it basically creates a solid pier that supports the entire surface of the building where it's going to go, and then the foundations can be placed basically on top of that, so you're floating the load across the entire landfill. And now if the landfill was 60 feet deep, this would not work, but this is an unlicensed landfill that was only filled to roughly 15, 17 feet in most cases, and there's a few spots that are a little bit deeper, but on average it's not more than about 20 feet, and so it's really within the range that this technology is cost affordable. We've looked at other landfills that are much deeper, like 60 feet of diapers and stuff, and that is just this technology wouldn't work because it's too deep. And then when you're dealing with the vapor mitigation system, the way I like to explain it is it's almost like you think about a roof keeps the water out from the sky, right? The vapor mitigation system keeps the vapors out from under the floor. So it's a little bit like you're building a roof underneath the floor that would stop any of the contaminated vapor from coming into the building, and then you're rerouting it through pipes and then harmlessly venting it to the atmosphere. So why develop this site? We think that it's a win-win and it's a really good use of the site because, again, without doing a project of this scale that's going to generate sufficient tax income to be able to reimburse the costs, you're never going to be able to cap the landfill because you're not generating enough economic activity to offset those costs. So we think it will increase the tax basis, the revenue. We estimate, now again, we're a speculative developer, so we don't hire, the tenants hire, but based on our portfolio that's 22 million square feet, we generally have an average that we put in all of our applications, and we stand by that, and it's consistent. And so in this project, we estimated about 640 jobs. Now, if one of the tenants is more on the light manufacturing side, that number could be higher. It could also be a little bit lower. It kind of depends what goes in there. We're looking at this as a $70 million investment. We think it's going to drive substantial economic activity in this area. And again, a big part of this is that the development itself is going to cap the site. This site will not be capped without a development specifically of this scale. It can't be done because there's no money to pay for it. And then again, all of the stormwater we put a lot of care into all the design, is that when this development is complete and rainwater falls from the sky, it will hit the pavement, it will hit the building. That's all stuff that's above the landfill and above the cap. And all that water will get channeled through the stormwater system and discharged and controlled on site through our detention ponds and then released into the system as necessary. But none of that water will ever touch the contamination, and that's the entire purpose of this development. And so I briefly touched on some of this, but I did want to go and talk a little bit nuanced about what does cleanup mean, because we often run into this, that when people hear the word cleanup, they think destruction. They think like all the contamination is gone. They chemically destroy it, they dig it up and move it somewhere else, or something like that. But the reality is most of the cleanup that happens in Michigan is built around engineering controls and controlling the potential risk from the contamination. And even when you look up in the state statute, remedial action, which is the thing that we're actually doing, it's really focused on preventing, minimizing, or mitigating the injury to public health, safety, welfare of the environment. And that includes cleanup, removal, but it also includes containment. And when you're talking about landfills, specifically, you're focused on containment because the cost to dig up the entire landfill and just move it someplace else, there's no economic activity that would ever justify that. So then you've got to look at it on the other side of the coin, well, does the human health risk justify that? Because sometimes people do have to spend a lot of money on cleanup, right? But when you can cap something and contain it in place and mitigate the risk such that the humans and the environment are not at risk, the economics of that don't make any sense to spend all this extra money and accomplish no further risk mitigation because you can completely control it with the capping operation. And when you look at the environmental laws at the federal and the state level, that's how they're structured. They're based on figuring out, is there a risk to people or the environment, and how do you mitigate that risk? And the state encourages you to find the most cost-effective way to do that because money doesn't obviously come out of thin air, and whether it's the state paying for it, or a private entity, or the government, or a local government, if you overspend on cleanup that makes no difference on one site, you're taking resources that could otherwise be applied to other sites. And that's why this whole program is set up this way. Now, that being said, there is, I think just about everybody from the area knows that there was drums that were removed from this site. And that's a perfect example where a risk wasn't controlled. And even though the site's been uncapped in sort of like, in this kind of, loose, uncontrolled manner for a long time, the risk was not deemed so urgent that anyone had to do anything about it immediately. But when they found these drums in the 80s, they did. And when you go back and you look at the record, as I understand it, solvent odors and oily sheens were found in the ditch that's kind of behind the school. And that triggered several complaints that went up the chain and went all the way up to the federal EPA in Region 5. And they mobilized, they did a bunch of assessments, and they did find a bunch of buried drums. And all those drums were removed. That's an example of something that you can't just cap that over, and the law doesn't let you cap that over. What we're talking about is sort of like broad, dispersive contamination that's not like located in a particular container or source. And when we're doing this project, if we encounter any drums, if we're digging a hole or digging a utility and we run into something like that, we're not allowed to bury it. We're not allowed to just cover it back up. We will have to remove it because it's in our way and it wouldn't be safe because that's not just sort of like general contamination. That's a very specific source. If it's identified, we will have to remove it and properly dispose of it. Now, the whole landfill obviously isn't that, and we don't think we're going to run into that situation. But if we do, we definitely would have to address it. So then this goes back up to the high-level concept of, well, how do you close a landfill? Well, landfills are meant to contain contamination. So the idea of then, containing contamination or containing something in one place, and then when you're finished with it, you're going to pick it up and move it someplace else, that doesn't really make a lot of sense for the way that they're designed. Now, we've talked about the idea that these landfills are unregulated. What that means is that the landfills, in the 1970s, there were several federal regulations that were coming into play to regulate landfills as people started to understand more about environmental contamination in the 70s. When that happened, there were a lot of kind of small operations, especially local operations, that had these landfills that were often dealing with kind of low-lying areas or other places where they were putting material. And they didn't want to comply with all the new regulations that were coming in. So a lot of these places just got abandoned. And that's why they're unlicensed, because they were closed, or they were never really closed, but they stopped operation before the laws came into effect that licensed them. And you see this across Metro Detroit. What does that mean? It means that in the condition that they are, there is a potential risk to human health in the environment because rainwater is hitting the landfill, it's running through it, it's getting into the groundwater, and it's potentially running off in other places. Now, is it at levels that is requiring an urgent, immediate response? No, that's what the drum thing was about in the 90s. But the condition wasn't dealt with. Now, despite the fact that they're unregulated, they didn't put these landfills here for just a random reason. They put them here because it has a very dense clay geology. And what that means is anyone who's ever gardened in their backyard and run into clay, it's real tight, it's hard to dig through. Well, that also holds water and it also holds contamination. Or not holds it, but can prevent it from sinking down deeper. So despite the fact that these landfills were put here and they were put out of service before the regulations came into play, there are some things going for them because they were put there specifically because of the type of geology that's there and that they'd be sort of contained within the clay bowl that they dug and put the material in. And if you look at it and you say, okay, well, what happens if there is a remedial action that becomes necessary? Eagle swoops in and says there's a problem with this site. What are they going to do? They're going to cap it. That's what they're going to require. But the issue is that who's going to pay for that capping? And there isn't funds to do that. The state doesn't have a big bucket of money to chase orphan sites like this. And if they did, they would cap it because that's the most cost-effective way to mitigate the risk. And if you would just try to dig it up, you would end up spending millions and millions of dollars that would not reduce the risk to human health and environment any more than just capping it. Because if nobody can drink the water, nobody can touch the soil, and the rainwater is controlled in a way that it's not interacting with it, you've essentially stopped all the potential risk from the site. So how do you pay for the cap, right? Eagle in the city doesn't have the money, and the private market can't build it for the reason that we mentioned before in terms of the market rents, which is why this all comes back to the brownfield plan, and why this is a kind of it's a yin and yang, it's a win-win, it's a package deal, because if you don't redevelop the site and generate new economic activity, you can't pay for the cap that needs to go in to protect the landfill, which is why the development was always paired in the brownfield plan with that. And one of the things that's important too is that in the brownfield plan, the way the law is structured, it's specifically structured to incentivize these types of deals where you get the control of the environmental contamination and the new economic activity. And then for a period of time, that economic activity, the new taxes that are generated, reimburse the cost to do the original thing. Now, the developer still has to basically go out and spend equity or loan money to do the work and get paid without interest over time. And they have to bake that into the pro forma. But at the end of the day, like that, a project can bear, but just like spending all the money with nothing else coming in to offset it, the project doesn't work financially for that. Now, but the law allows you to capture 100% of all the new taxes. So basically what would happen in a situation like that is the city would get no new taxes. They would get other ancillary economic spin-off activity, maybe like, other ancillary spending and things like that. If they had an income tax, which Romulus doesn't, you would get some money there, but you wouldn't get anything. What we did in negotiations when the original brownfield plan was conceived and we negotiated with the city and the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, we set it up and agreed that we would structure it where 10% of all the new taxes would go to the city. And that was structured specifically because, and honestly, I wish they would have set the law up this way at the beginning, but not every community, has plans set up that way. But I do think the city should get something, right? Like, there should be some immediate benefit to the city, and that was the whole reason why it was structured that way in the brownfield plan, was to give 10% of all the new taxes to the city, so as this development happens, despite the fact that, yes, we have to get reimbursed for the millions of dollars of economic, money that we had to put into the cleanup and the capping of the landfill, the city's still getting their piece. So then we get down to we're here for the special land use and for these two large buildings. Well, how does all this connect? Like, what's the story? Well, the story is that this was always a project with two large buildings, and there's several different reasons why there. And Kyle can talk a lot about the market demand and where the market demand is and why a site of this size, the value of it specifically is related to the idea that you can build these larger buildings. But this site is unique because, as we've been talking about for this brownfield plan, there's a lot of cost associated with developing on the property. And the thing is the reason why large buildings are preferred in a lot of the marketplace is because they're on a cost per square foot basis, they're cheaper to build because you don't have as many walls, you have large open spaces, and that's key for us too, because then the brownfield cost to offset the foundation cost and support all those walls is less. And so when we presented the brownfield plan to the city, we, as Kyle mentioned, it showed two buildings that were roughly 500,000 feet with a possibility of combining into one large building at 1.2 million square feet, or 1.1, I think. And that was structured in that way for multiple different reasons. One was economic and market driven in terms of where is the market demand. Also, what is MEDC asking for? And when you look at, large, manufacturing plants or large RFPs that they're getting at the state level, where Michigan is really trying to compete, where they're short on is shovel-ready sites of sufficient size that can support buildings of 500 square feet or larger. That also is unique on this site because the smaller buildings and the way we budgeted them and the way the brownfield plan was budgeted, it was specifically structured with these two larger buildings, and the cost that we have to incur to get those buildings to market, that's all in the plan, right, that we presented to council and got approved, because if we were trying to build multiple small buildings, it's a totally different economics. One, the market's not there, but two, just from a cost offset from the brownfield, the cost would go up because you have so many more walls in all these tiny little buildings. So even though you have less, maybe you might even have less square feet overall, or maybe it's more, it doesn't really matter. It's all the other costs that go into it that are all baked into it. We'd have to restructure the brownfield because there wouldn't be enough money in it to be able to offset the cost of building all those smaller buildings. And by doing that too, it also allows you, by getting a more efficient build and lower environmental cleanup costs, the property gets on the tax rolls faster to the benefit of the city and everyone else. So instead of the 10% of the new taxes, once those costs are reimbursed, then you get 100%. And that's an enormous increase in terms of the overall tax base to the city from the site that's getting almost nothing. So that was kind of the high level piece that I wanted to go over. I'm happy to answer questions as we move on. But we wanted to tell the story about, one, why are we doing what we're doing, and what does it look like, and how does it all connect? Because this is all sort of like it's a complex site, but this whole thing is a complex puzzle that is a complete thought. You have the cleanup side and you have the two big building side. It's all put together to make something that works, and it doesn't work without it. And then the last piece that Kyle mentioned is, so we've been negotiating with Eagle for almost 2 years on the approval of our Act 301 work plan. So what that plan is that when we do the brownfield plan, when we got the city approved the brownfield plan, that's the local approval of the project. That's mostly focused on, high-level concept, what are we proposing to do in terms of what the cleanup's gonna look like, but it's also mostly based on the taxes and the economic deal that's like kind of structured around the project, right? And what got approved was a $25 million TIF, 10% goes to the city from the get-go in terms of any new taxes, and then it takes about 25 years with the remaining taxes to reimburse the $25 million based on projections. That's how the plan was set up. Once that got approved at the local level, we then have to take it to the state level. And at the state level, that's where we get a lot more specific and detailed on how are we going to cap the landfill. What exactly are we going to do? What kind of pipes? What kind of protocols are we going to put in place? We've been negotiating back and forth. They ask us questions, we respond. And it takes a long time to get through all that level of detail with them. They finally approved our plan, as Kyle mentioned, just a couple weeks ago on the 13th. As part of that plan, one of the things they discussed is they wanted us to do pre- and post-development methane monitoring around the landfill. So what you see here, all those red dots are proposed locations for where we're going to do that monitoring. And what that's about is there is methane in the landfill. It's mostly concentrated around the center of building number 2 in terms of what we saw in all the testing. But what Eagle's concerned about is that, right now there's nothing, it's kind of the opposite problem, right? Rainwater hits the ground and goes into the, just goes through the soil. Well, any methane gas is generated does the opposite, it goes up, it goes into the air. The issue that they were concerned about is if you put buildings and pavement on it, what happens when you put a top on it? Will the methane move out sideways? Okay, so the whole purpose of this plan is to deal with that. Now, we are confident that's not an issue for several different reasons. A big one being is that the buildings themselves act as venting because they have a venting system in them. So when you look at it, the most of the site is these 2 giant buildings in the middle. Any methane that comes out from underneath them will get captured by the system and they'll just go right through it. So it's not going to it won't squish out the sides, basically. Also, the thing is methane doesn't really move that well through the water table. It moves above the water. So you have the top of the ground, you have the water, the methane kind of moves in that space in between. Our site is structured in such a way where, because we're building it up on a hill, especially with these berms and everything that the city had us put in, the berms are higher than the surrounding area. So any methane that even did get squished out would just come out the sides of the hill and go to the atmosphere at concentrations you couldn't even detect. What the state is ultimately concerned about is if something like accumulates in one space. So if you were to go and build a big building like this and you didn't put any venting in it, over time you could have methane accumulate in it if it basically got into the building, which is why you have to have a methane system in the first place. But we're confident that, there's no issue, but nevertheless, Eagle is of the mind that they would always rather err on the side of having testing data. So they required us, as part of this conditional approval, to basically come to them and just, they're like, yeah, we believe you would prove it. So this is our plan to prove it. And with that, did you want to talk about the track?
Just have a few more things to cover before we pass it back to the chair. But so there were comments made in the previous meeting about E-Course Road and just the improvements. So on this slide, we have a new traffic signal that would go on E-Course Road. It'd be across from GM's most eastern driveway. There'll be a traffic signal as well as lane widening. So this was a big comment that was brought up in the city's plan review originally, as well as the third-party reviews. So the main reason we purchased 2 additional houses is to make sure that these lined up. This was not something that was part of the original plan, but was a request from the city. So we made sure we got that. And then in terms of sourcing additional funding for the improvements, I know we heard from the Aerotropolis. I know there's the TIFA is helping to work on E-Course Road improvements. But one of the big things is the way that MDOT has road grant funding structured is the tenant has to be identified. So we've mentioned multiple times these are speculative buildings. We don't have a tenant identified at the moment. On two of our recent projects, we've been able to identify funding after the project has started, once we have a tenant lined up. So the most relevant example to this is in Van Buren Township between Ecorse Road and Van Born. We were able to get a $3.5 million grant from MDOT to the county to redo that entire 1 mile stretch of the road. We can't do that right now. We don't have a tenant identified. It needs to be the tenant's name on the application. We did this as well in Hazel Park along DeQuinda Road. That's shared by Oakland and Macomb County. So that's something we fully intend to do here once, if and when we get a tenant, but it's not something we're able to apply for up front. So we have a proven track record of being able to do this. It's just unfortunately the state's MDOT budget isn't set up for programs for speculative buildings. These are two quick drone photos. I believe we've shared these previously. So this is the eastern side of the project. This is the northeast corner of the project looking south. So looking from Ecorse south to Wick, the project would be on the right side of the road, and the subdivision along Ecorse is to Page left. So there are some very thick trees on both sides here. So this is the high point of the site. This is significantly higher than this is about 50 feet higher than the top of the building will actually be. But just wanted to give a sense, looking south to the school property as well as to the houses on Wick Road. You can't see the houses on Wick Road, and the school, which has no windows facing north, is very far away. And again, this is elevated above the trees, so if you were down lower, you'd be looking through the trees. So just a rendering of the two buildings. Here's our landscape plan. Showed this a little earlier. So the last thing I wanted to leave with is, so Mark mentioned the benefits to capping the site and some additional tax revenue. Two other really big benefits to Romulus, right? We paid $1.5 million up front, right? Romulus has that money that went to the city. In addition to just the monetary benefit for selling the site, we took on the due care liabilities for this site, right? So right now, or even in the past, when Romulus owned the site, they technically were responsible for making sure no one trespassed. If anybody came in contact with the contamination, when people were dirt biking, that was the city of Romulus's responsibility. And as best as the city tried, it was kind of like chasing its own tail, right? So that liability has been passed on to Ashley Capital moving forward. So though that's not financially quantifiable, it was a big part of why this deal moved forward. Mark mentioned the 500,000 foot buildings. Why are we focused on these larger buildings? We own 22 million square feet in the market. Our average building size is over 500,000 feet. We don't have a single building over 500,000 square feet that's vacant. We currently are building a building in the city, in Van Buren Township at 600,000 feet, and it is a tenant that is leaving Romulus and going to Van Buren because there is no room for buildings this size, right? They needed to expand. They had no option to stay in the city of Romulus. We've heard, well, why do we need more buildings here if they're buildings that North Point's building or over at Vining and Wick Road? Those buildings, the largest size is 350,000 feet. So we tried to find a specific niche market here where we focus on the larger tenants. If that tenant who is leaving Romulus had been able to stay here, they had told us they would have stayed here, right? It's just an option of you can't fit a 500,000 foot tenant in a 350,000 foot house. It's equivalent to taking a four bedroom house and putting them in a 2, right? That's how that shakes out. So the other big piece of being able to have larger buildings is you have larger tenants, more sophisticated tenants, and they're easier to manage. There were comments made in public comment at the last council meeting about the quality of the tenant. When you have smaller tenants, they are harder to manage. They tend to be more mom and pop operations. they tend to lead to the city chasing them a lot on code enforcement. When we have larger tenants, they tend to be national, more creditworthy, tend to be higher paying jobs. We've had similar national tenants in our Romulus Business Center off Van Born Road for 20, 25 years. And I speak on behalf, obviously self-serving in this, but we have had very few issues with that property that the city is consistently dealing with, from code, fire, police. There's a well-run, larger national tenants who are image conscious. The last piece goes to the neighbors, right? So we understand there's frustration from the neighbors. A lot of the frustration, frankly, is to the development happening at all, right? We are here asking for special land use approval. Simply, can we build buildings over 80,000 feet? A lot of the concerns stem from flooding, unknown extensive historical contamination. We did not cause that issue, but we're here to be a part of the solution. We want to help the flooding situation. We believe that our addition of the stormwater controls will help in the area. We've been very responsive to residents. We have emails daily that are going back and forth. We're in contact. We spoke to the Wayne County Drain Commissioner, Deputy Drain Commissioner today to make sure that concerns were being addressed. We worked with the city building department. We worked with the mayor's office to make sure that concerns along certain streets are being addressed with flooding. And we're working with Eagle to make sure we identify money for environmental testing in that area. That conservation easement had nothing to do with Ashley Capital. The contamination had nothing to do with us. We want to be a part of the solution, and we want to be part of fixing this and making sure the residents are happy. And that's why they all have our personal contact information, and we are working to make sure they're happy with the outcome as well. Thank you.
John, let me ask one question.
John?
Is there any other?
I got a question. When would these buildings be ready to be occupied if you get approved?
So the hope would be the end of 2025 and the early part of 2026.
And how many truck bays are in these buildings?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. Let me see if I can grab that.
Approximately, I don't need exact number.
It's in the ballpark of 200.
Yeah, our civil engineer was saying it's in the ballpark of about 200.
For both the total?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yes, excuse me. You're talking about putting additional light at E-course?
Correct.
Okay, so how close is that to the railroad tracks?
According to our civil engineer, it's 1,200 feet.
1,200 feet. Okay, so how close is it to the light that's right there in front of the Romulus City Event Center?
It's 13. That's another quarter mile.
It's about 1,300 feet, a quarter of a mile.
It's pretty close for two lights right there. Have anyone considered the traffic, like if a train is coming, or even if a train is not coming, the traffic that will be held up beyond the railroad tracks if that light was there? I mean,
Sure.
that's pretty close.
So the way...
Will it blink? And that's another thing. Will it blink at a certain time?
Sure. So there's two things to that. When the signal goes in, we have to do optimization, is what they call it. So basically, to get it to sync with all the other lights, we'll go east to Wayne Road, and it actually goes all the way west to 275, right? So we want to make sure you're not going start, stop, and they effectively speak to each other. There's also railroad preemption, so there's a way for the traffic signal that would be on our traffic signal at E-course Road to communicate with when the trains are actually coming. So yes, it's designed to help traffic flow better than actually hinder it with additional signals. So they'll try to time it up with the GM signal as well as our signal, so you kind of have coming onto E-course Road and then the through traffic moves easily.
because it's only a certain time of the day, and if I'm not mistaken, even in the evening, that light in front of GM actually is not blinking. So just to make sure you guys have looked into that, because you got one light that is actually operating and one light is blinking, it's not.
Correct, so ours would actually, they call it actuated, so it's not like ours would cycle if there's no one there. So it would, if a truck was trying to leave and take a left, it would sense it and then the light would change, but you would never be coming down Ecorse Road and it would change and there was no one exiting. So unless the train was coming and they were trying to get you to stop.
And I was just listening to the young man that was here up at the podium previously, and you were saying that
It's Mark.
Mark, I'm sorry. Is it a guarantee, or is Eagle telling you have to show something that these toxins or this, contamination cannot rise up?
Yeah, so the only contamination that really defies gravity is going to be like like vapor contamination, right? Like moving through. If you think about like a soil, right? Like a big piece of dirt, right? Vertically, the water might be contaminated or whatever. You can have vapor that moves through kind of like a maze, moving through all the soil particles. But the soil contamination can't defy gravity, right? Like what you were talking about at the previous meeting is a real thing. And often what happens is when people bury debris at very shallow depths, what you end up, because Michigan's freeze-thaw cycle, what you end up is this thing that happens where the soil sort of like shrinks and grows and shrinks and grows, and it basically like pinches all the pieces that don't shrink and grow at the same like heat profile. So when you have like broken, like pieces of metal or broken glass or something like that, and someone just dusts it over with a real thin cover of topsoil, what will end up happening is over the winter, at most maybe 2 cycles, you'll get that pinching, squeezing effect, and it basically pushes that debris to the surface. And all of a sudden you'll start to see broken glass and stuff like that at the surface. We won't have that issue for multiple different reasons, because there is, like, there's debris in the landfill, but the cap that we put in, it's all underneath pavements, and anything that's not under pavement, we actually put down an impermeable barrier, like a thick fabric that basically contains all that specifically for that reason. And then the clean contaminated, or the clean soil cap goes on top of that. So in our landscaped areas, we'll have, whatever the existing material is, that yes, we probably will have some broken glass and little bits and stuff like that from just whatever's in the landfill. That will first have a covering on top of it that nothing can get through, and then clean soil on top of that. So it's both deeper and contained under that fabric, so there's really no risk to have anything come up to the surface. Yeah, and we also have to do annual inspections. So a perfect example is we had a property where, we come in, we do annual inspections, tenant comes in, they don't listen to the plans that they sign, they dig a hole, right? Well, we catch that in our inspections at a minimum twice a year. We check it spring and fall. Plus our property management's out to the property all the time. As soon as we see something like that, we get on top of it immediately. That area gets cordoned off and the tenant has to pay for it. And then we basically fix all that and, get it back under the covering and put it under the cap.
And, my concern, as I said before, the meeting you were at before, I'm just right down the street east of this building. So how long can you guarantee that these toxins won't get into the water drain that actually goes through the subdivision that I live in?
Sure. So what I can tell you is that, it's hard to give guarantees in life, but yeah, sure. Like I am 100% confident that any of the contamination in the groundwater will not get into the storm system when we build all these pipes with watertight, chemically resistant joints. It's not physically possible. Now, if there's groundwater that's there, right, and there's contaminated groundwater that is already there, that's a separate issue, right, that could, be present. But the reality is this area, as I mentioned with its clay geology, you don't have a continuous groundwater table. What you have is, if you think about the surface of the ground, the clay surface, changes. Some places people dug it out, like where the landfill is. Other places it's just wherever the glaciers did. And any water you have basically sits inside those valleys, right? And if there's enough and it gets high enough into granular fill, yeah, you can have a water table, but you don't really have a water table at this site. If you sample water in one place, you can step 20 feet over and it's dry, and then you step another 20 feet and then you find water again. It's because it's all in these little pockets.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from
Through the
council.
chair.
Yes,
I just wanted to make sure I heard that right. You said there's 200 bays in each building for trucks?
No, I believe that was around, like, an estimate, but total for both.
Estimate total for both?
Through the chair, so we just, our architect just pulled up the plans. There's 242 total potential ones. We don't anticipate installing all of them upfront. That'd be part of the,
That's a lot of trucks going through the city of Romulus again. You know, and many of our trucks, I know that don't stick with the main roads. They've been tearing up our side roads.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
no, and we understand that, but, you know, through the chair, this goes back to the, you know, the site was zoned for this use. It's not like having 17 buildings has fewer trucks, right? It's, this was part of the overall plan, and this was what was discussed from day one in terms of using an industrial use, right? We came to this site because it was zoned industrial. We didn't ask to rezone something that the city wants as mixed use or retail, commercial. We settled on the site that already had the zoning and it's on Ecorse Road, which is intended for trucks.
Well, you did mention that comparing the two different sites, I mean, the two different types of building, that the smaller buildings would probably attract mom and pop businesses. I can't see, you know, that many trucks going to those type of businesses. Whereas you're talking 240 truck things for the large buildings. Just a comment.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you, sir.
Yes, did Mr. Wilson?
No, go
No,
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Next.
I wanted to go back to Ecorse. So where would you start expanding Ecorse before your building? It would be right after the railroad tracks?
Correct. We can't touch the railroad crossing, so it would start at the railroad tracks and kind of widen out, so we have a turn lane and a bypass lane if you're headed westbound, and then it tapers down going further west than that. And then if you're coming eastbound, you'll have a deceleration lane so you can turn into the project.
Now, would all the docks for these two buildings be on the back side of the building?
Well, unfortunately, there really isn't a backside to the building, right? We just, backside would maybe considered.
Behind the building?
No, they're on the sides of the building.
Okay, but they're not in the front?
Correct. It will not look like the project that was further west, where the docks look at the road. So if you're looking from Ecorse Road, maybe I'll go back and see if I can find that aerial. So Ecorse Road is on the page bottom on the left. So if you were to look down the long driveway, it's about a quarter of a mile till you can get to the building. 1,600 feet. So it's a pretty far distance, and what you will see is landscaping, car parking, and then the office corner of the building. You shouldn't be looking at the docks from the road.
Because is that your building further down Ecorse Road? I think it's a little cross. And, no, it was next to Jim, if I'm not mistaken. Is that your building?
That is not our building.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying, as far as the docks being?
Correct.
Yeah, that doesn't look good at all. Yeah, so that's why I asked that question. Would they be right there off the road?
They won't, and I think we have see if I can find a bunch of stuff hidden in the back here, but this is a photo of our Crossroads Distribution Center project in Van Buren, right down on Ecorse Road on the west side of 275. So this is indicative of what the buildings will look like in terms of glass and painting. So you won't be seeing any docks from Ecorse Road.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wilson, did you?
Yes, thank you. Just so I can be clear here, you went before the Board of Zoning Appeals, obviously,
Correct.
previously, and they granted the variances.
Correct.
And again, just to be sure, looks like the variances it went from 14, looks like 14-foot light poles to 25
Correct.
feet. Obviously, the building is going to be higher versus your first, right? You were going to have about 17 buildings before. Now you're going to have looks like two light speculative industrial cross-dock buildings.
Correct.
At 470,000 square feet for one and 547,000 for the second one.
Correct.
So that, in and of itself, that sort of encompasses your variances. I mean, that's what you're looking for, those four additional,
There were, through the chair, there were three specific variances that we requested. So.
but you mentioned the trees, though, so is that something that, you said
So
1,400 trees?
The trees actually tied into the special land use approval.
Okay.
Not to the zoning board of appeals. Zoning board of appeals had three items.
Okay.
We were taking light pole heights from 14 feet to 25 feet. The maximum building height in the M1 zoning is 35, and I believe we're at 47. And then there was a use variance. It's an odd nuance of the zoning of the site. The detention pond actually sits in a residentially zoned area. So rather than go through with rezoning, which we didn't want to do, we just put the detention pond in the residentially zoned area. So it's outside of the landfill at that point. It's in landfill material, but we will remove that material.
Sure. And I have another bullet point here, talks to about $70,000 for sidewalks.
Correct. So that was a waiver.
Could you expound upon that, please?
Yeah, sure. That was a waiver that was requested at Planning Commission. So that was something that the city staff and third-party reviewers agreed with. Let's see if I can find a. So as part of the development, given the site is this large, it's the 286-acre site, the areas that are down on Wick Road, if you see the small road, it's on the west sides of the school, there's just small areas where our ownership touches all the way up to Wick Road. So rather than install just little pieces of sidewalk along Wick Road on the land we own, we give the city $70,000 and they can decide if and when the sidewalks go in, or they can put them somewhere else. So it's a payment in lieu of us putting in the sidewalk. We still have sidewalk on Ecorse Road to cross our street and get across the street to the sidewalk on GM side. So for practical purposes, the front door will have sidewalk. This was talking about something that's over a mile away. It's just a unique part of the site.
Thank you.
Any other comments from Ms. Talley?
I just have a comment. Is it Mark? You said this was high level, and you gave so much information, it was crazy. I'm like, high level? It was great information, it was a great education, and I'm very impressed with your background and skill. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but it was amazing. So thank you, and Kyle, thank you. And what I liked about you guys is both your presentation, the transparency. You were very transparent in everything we talked about this evening, even in the first one. This one was a lot more detailed than I remember from our last long meeting, but thank you for the transparency, the safety, everything that you brought up was so relevant. I just want to thank you. Very impressive presentation, and I just want to thank you both.
Thank you, Ms. Talley. Any other comments?
Yes.
Ms. Williams, then Ms. Page.
So one of the variances, I want to be clear with this. The original height of the building was how much? 25 feet tall?
There was never
That's like-
I guess the building height was always what we intended it to be. It just was required to have a variance because there's a height limit within the zoning ordinance.
Right, but what was the original? Because you're asking us to extend it, right? Or to approve it to be higher?
So that approval was part of the zoning board of appeals. This is for the special land use for the buildings over 80,000 feet.
Right.
But so to specifically ask questions, the maximum in M1 is 35 feet. What we had approved through Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals was 47 feet.
Okay. So that's not in front of council? The extension of the building? Height?
I don't believe so. I believe it's just the 80,000 feet for the special land use. I defer to the city attorney on that.
That's correct. Your decision has nothing to do with the height of the building, because that's already been approved by the BZA. So it's part of the special land use here. That's already a given, the 47 feet height.
Through the chair.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Kathy.
But in order to build the large building that you need to, which we have to approve, it means you will build higher. right? So basically, we may not be approving the height, but if we approve the building, we are giving them the height.
Yeah.
Well, but I guess the answer to that is that if they built a lot of small buildings that were 47 feet high, and they wouldn't need council approval if they were below 80,000 square feet. And all they would have had to have was the BZA approval at that point, which they already have.
So, excuse, through the chair quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
The variance talks about light poles, 14 feet to 25
There were
feet.
3 separate variances in the state proposal.
So, I think I understand what my colleagues are saying. Okay, I'll defer to them. Go ahead, Chair.
Mayor?
Through the chair, and this might clear it up a little bit, on page 17 of the package, it talks about the recommendation from the city planner and the planning commission. And it speaks specifically to the SLU regarding the square footage. So the language is right in there in the packet on page 17. If that might help clarify.
So now, you just helped me, thank you, through the chair. So, square footage, you're talking about width, right? I mean, are you talking about width, or are you talking about height? I mean,
So this is specifically what we're requesting. Can we
Okay.
do by right, based upon the Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, we could build 17 buildings that are all 80,000 feet, so smaller rectangles. What we're asking for is to consolidate them into 2 larger buildings, increase the setbacks and landscaping. That's just a nuance to the Romulus zoning ordinance. This is not required in other municipalities for special land use. It's just something that's specific to Romulus.
so the buildings are the same size, the previous and the subsequent? Same size in terms of height? Is what you're
Correct.
saying? In terms of height?
Correct.
Okay, okay, I'm good now, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Roscoe?
just to clarify, when we're talking about the square footage, we're talking about the thumbprint on the ground. It
Correct.
has nothing to do with the height, nothing to do with anything else.
Correct.
Just the square footage on the ground when you measure around the building.
Correct. Footprint is the
Yep.
best way we say
Yep.
it. It has nothing to do with cubic volume or anything like
No.
that.
John?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wadsworth?
These buildings will be identical, right? Or they're,
Architecturally, yes, but the building number 2 is slightly larger than building number 1.
okay, thank you.
Yes, and I asked that question pertaining to the height of the buildings because it was asked of me and I couldn't answer it.
Okay.
So I didn't know if it was gonna be a 1-story, 2-story, 3-story by going up higher versus, I mean, I can understand why you don't wanna build 17 smaller buildings. And I can understand it makes sense for a company, especially a bigger company, to not want the smaller buildings versus a bigger building. I understand that. But I was just asking a question because I wanted to be clear whether you were asking council to vote and approve for you to go up higher or wider. And so that answered the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor?
And Economic Development Director Kevin Kraus might be able to shed some light on it too. Kevin, could you come up and add a couple details, please? Thank you.
Evening, Mayor, Council. Just to summarize real quick, to hopefully clarify some of the questions that were being asked. I'm not going to go through some of the original dates because I think Kyle had already done that, but specifically what you were talking about. So June of '23, the Planning Commission recommended City Council the approval of the special land use application for 2 buildings greater than 80,000 square feet. Subsequently, after that, in August of '23, this project went in front of the Zoning Appeals Board, and they have approved through that process the variances for the building height, the light pole height, and the variance for the detention pond to be on the 5.7 acres of the residential. So those variances have already been approved through the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Planning Commission has already approved this and made their recommendations to City Council. The only thing that's in front of City Council this evening tonight to make the decision on is the special land use approval from City Council this evening for the square footage or the thumbprint or the footprint of these buildings to be greater than 80,000 square feet. So that's the only thing in front of you guys this evening to rule on or to make the decision on.
Ms. Roscoe?
Through the chair, And thank you for touching base on the brownfield and explaining the taxes, and that the fact that you did not have to give us 10% of that was your choice. And we really appreciate that because it helps with everything else we have to do, our police, our fire, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to make that totally clear, that that was an option that you give us, that we did not have to, you didn't have to do that. And as far as explaining all the environmental, how you're going to do all that, I really appreciate that. That was a real learning curve for everybody, I think, up here, that you really did a good job with that. So, but if we don't have any other questions, I'll make a motion.
I think,
Through the chair.
yeah, we have a person who wanted to speak first before we vote.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, we have two members of the public who have requested to speak under this particular item. Just as a housekeeping measure, that you will have 3 minutes to speak. Any additional time will be upon the consent of the chairperson. Mr. Chair, the first request that we have is from Coralie Gerlamino. I'm sorry if I messed up your name.
Can you come up to the podium? Can you come up to the
You have
podium?
to step up to the mic.
Can you come up to the podium, please?
I don't want my 3 minutes to start if I'm asking you a question.
No, this ain't basketball, but go ahead.
I want him to explain what a Brownsfield is. Isn't it our taxes? Yeah, it's our tax dollars, right?
Yes, you can,
Through the
yes,
state.
you can come up and explain to her. No problem.
So we can go down as deep as you want to go, but at what a brownfield plan is that it's a mechanism that was established by the state of Michigan to incentivize the development of contaminated land. And the way it works is that it caps the value of the property prior to the development and prior to the environmental activities. The new taxes that are generated from the development that otherwise would not exist if the development did not exist get captured and then reimbursed to the developer.
So your original digging and creating is done, and then you go back to the state of Michigan and receive some of our tax dollars to replace what you would put out. It's kind of like,
Ma'am, you have to come up to the podium.
Yeah, so I'll explain it this way. So as we noted, there is cost associated with getting this property in a buildable condition. In its current condition, it has no value and it's not buildable. We have to spend a lot of money to make that happen. The amount of money that it takes for us to do that process makes the property that we couldn't do it with private dollars because we'd never be able to achieve market rent. So we wouldn't be able to build something that stands alone. So what the state did when they created the brownfield law was they said, well, look, like we don't have enough grant money to give out to do all this work, right? And the cities don't have the money either. So what they did is they made basically a compromise, which was they'll say, okay, well, the project won't happen without the incentive. So what we'll do is we'll tie the incentive to the project's performance and project happening. And that's basically what created the brownfield law, which is you use future taxes that would otherwise not exist. So yes, there are taxes, right, that like in a vacuum would be owed to the taxing jurisdictions, right, and they would go through. But that project does not exist if you don't do the cleanup. And the way it's structured is we have to spend the money up front and we don't get any interest, right? So we get a loan, we use equity, we do the work, and then we have to wait 25 years without interest to get the money back. And while that's happening, we structured it in a way where, yes, we are slowly getting reimbursed for the cost that we spent to get the property to ground zero that we could just build on it through the tax money. And then, but all those new taxes being generated, 10% goes through to the normal jurisdictions so that so they get that.
the money's going to get paid back in. But I also see this, and I don't know if I'm right or not. I had my house built. I got a builder, he went around, put his money into it, and then he got a certain amount of his money in it. He went to my bank, and he gave them the information, and they gave him the money.
Right, but your builder didn't have to go and spend a lot of money just to make the property buildable. That's the difference.
Okay, hold on. If you have some more questions, you can pull them to the side and ask, because we're going to have to move on.
I
Okay.
That the tip money is tax money, that the Brownsfield is tax money, it's our tax money that's going towards this. They may be doing the work, but they're getting paid, and then they'll pay back after 20 years. My attitude with this all is, I want to thank Kathy Abdul and Virginia Williams and William Wadsworth for voting for the voters, for voting for the citizens, and not voting for Ashley Capital. I think that's a great step forward. I don't believe that our tax dollars should be spent on something that overshadows our school system, our community school system. I do see, or I didn't before, I was really stupid when I was 16 and I thought the state of Michigan and the federal government took care of all of this toxic waste that was on this site. I am less than a mile away. 30 years ago, I built a pretty good sized house. I would have never done that. The toxins, as far as I'm concerned, have gone for 30 years unmonitored. And our wastewater, the rainwater, it's not wastewater, rainwater goes straight across the back of the elementary school and across the back through the football field into a culvert. I know mine comes from Cogswell, back to that same culvert. Everything runs that way. It's been unmonitored. I've got paperwork from the FOIA. They have filed not to take any responsibility for the existing toxic waste. It's not their responsibility. That's gone through. They've also filed in their paperwork, there's no name for the last owners, which I believe it was on. So that's one. I've got all this paperwork. I do. I didn't bring it in. I could probably make a copy and everybody could get some. But I believe that it needs to be monitored, it needs to be looked at, and we need to find out how far into that block the toxic waste goes. Does it go into the backyards of our schools? We haven't even monitored our school children. Have any of our school children come down with asthma or cancer, or even the elementary and middle school employees, the teachers? Do we know any of this? We're not paying attention. We don't have to. I think it's time we start. I think it's time we start. Yeah, they may be putting a cap on it, but nothing lasts forever.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Nothing lasts forever.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the next request comes from Kristen Nairmore.
Everybody, thank you for having us tonight. I just wanted to touch base on a couple concerns that I have. We talk a lot about the capping and what the process is into going into it, but some concerns I have after doing some research is after X amount of time, you know, capping isn't considered permanent when it comes to taking care of a landfill site. So after I read that 30 years, where is the financial support to come back in and fix anything that might come back within that time frame or post that time frame? Additionally, I want to know if there have been any discussions with the school board. There's been a lot of talk about the current governments that they've discussed this with, but has there been a chance for the school board to say, hey, these are our concerns? Is there anything that can be done to address them? I think that's about all I really have there, but my main concern is down the line when these chemicals start to come back up, what is done as far as private investors or money being able to come back in and fix that. We also hear that they have people that are moving out to Van Buren. So if that comes to place, these facilities aren't large enough in 30 plus years, Is that site going to stay vacant? Is it going to be monitored at that time? We've got warehouses on the east side of the airport currently, between Middle Belt and Easter off of Harrison, that have been vacant for decades. And what's being done there? Could this potentially happen down the line here, and this site still be considered hazardous, but no monitoring done?
Thank
That's
you.
all I have.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I just wanted to respond to a few things pretty quickly. So in terms of what we filed, it's called a baseline environmental assessment. It's a BEA through EGLE. It basically says that we're not responsible for anything that happened in the past, but we have due care responsibility for the site, and we can't do anything to exacerbate it going forward, right? They can't come point the finger at me for something that somebody did and buried in the ground 60 years ago. But if I do something that spreads that contamination somewhere where it shouldn't have gone, that is our responsibility. That responsibility does not end after 30 years. What ended after 30 years was the brownfield plan. Our due care responsibility extends into perpetuity, or whoever owns the building, right? So the incentive to maintain this is the investment that's made in the project, right? So the marginal cost to fix the landscape, right? We have a building over this in pavement. So the marginal cost to fix the landscaping or fix an area or fix a pipe somewhere is backed by the cost of this, what at that point will be $100+ million project, hopefully. In terms of tax dollars spent, just clarify two things. These are not, Romulus will never come out of pocket for anything in this project. It is a reimbursement of tax dollars, future tax dollars that we pay. The school debt is not included in this. So we are not able to capture the school debt. So the millages that go to service the Romulus school's debt are not included in the brownfield plan. And on top of that, the school's funding is funded by the state on a per pupil allowance, meaning that even though we are capturing the state school dollars, Romulus schools are still made whole by the state through their operating or their general fund. So we are not taking school dollars, and the debt is actually being paid down throughout this process. So the 10% that Councilwoman Roscoe was mentioning, it's actually more than that because the debt is still serviced. So I think we mentioned in the original brownfield presentation, over the 25 years, assuming the valuation of tax valuation, the schools get almost $4 million of debt extinguished just from this project. And we're not adding any students from this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to get ready to call? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, and in regards to the tax base, the thing of it is, right now, it's vacant property. And so you're paying taxes on vacant property. And as you build, the value of that property will go up. And we will capture 10% of the value of what those taxes would be. And they will supersede anything that you're paying for taxes now to us. So if we leave that land vacant for the next 20 years, we will not capture any other revenue except for how, the little bit of value that the property would go up. And at this point, nobody else is, well, somebody else might step in and take over that property from you or what have you, but they're still going to have to do the same thing that you're doing as far as getting the brownfield and getting that cleaned up environmentally. And so that's a big plus for us all the way around because you have to monitor that. So right now, there's no monitoring going on at all. So in the long run, it's to our benefit that you're going to monitor where that's all going and how far out it's going and keep that under control. And by having it inspected twice a year, you're going to know when there's an issue and a problem, and you're going to have to address it. And it's not us that's going to have eyes on you. It's EGLE and the state of Michigan. So it's not just us that's going to have jurisdiction over that. You got a lot of other people that you're going to have to atone to keep that all under control. And I think that's a big plus for us all the way around to clean that up back there because as of now, it's doing nothing but sitting there. So, and like I said, in the long run, that 10% that we get is going to supersede anything that we're getting right now to many dollars.
We got one more, and then we're going to do roll call vote. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just like to make this clear. When it comes to township, village, city, county, state, and federal government, it is taxpayer dollars. Every form of government operates off of taxpayer dollars. So it doesn't matter what department they put it in, Tifa, Brownsfield, no matter where they send the money to or hold the money in a particular fund. It is, and I listen to the residents, and I'm not for sure if that's what she was trying to say, but I always make that clear, because a lot of times people want us to think, well, it's not coming from you. Maybe not directly from our pockets or from the city, but all form of government is operated off of taxpayers' dollars. That's how they function. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Go ahead. Tear the house down.
Are we ready?
Ready.
Alrighty, yeah. Through the chair, I'll make a motion for SLU-2023-004 to concur with the recommendation of the Planning Commission and approve the special land use request for the Romulus Distribution Center at 36711 Ecorse Road to allow 2 industrial warehouse buildings larger than 80,000 square feet, based on the findings of the fact noted in the minutes of the Planning Commission and associated consultant and staff reports, and subject to the conditions of the site plan approval.
I second that motion.
It's been motioned by Ms. Roscoe, supported by Ms. Talley, for the SLU-2023-004 Romulus Distribution Center at 36711 Ecorse Road. If there's no further discussion, roll call vote. Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
No.
Ms. Williams?
No.
Ms. Abdo?
No.
Chair votes yes. Motion approved.
Thank you, City Council. Number 4 is the chairperson's report.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We had no special meeting tonight, but I do like to do a little something for a resident named Joe. I know every year on hazard material, I always update Joe on some household hazard waste collections. Joe, if you're looking, on April the 6th at the Wayne County Community College on 9555 Haggerty Road in Belleville, they will be collecting household paints, stains, dyes, floor wax, floor care products, carpet cleaners, furniture polish, bathroom cleaners, stain removers, solvents, pharmaceutical waste, nail polish, glue, fertilizer, lawn and garden chemicals, antifreeze, motor oil, gasoline, automobile batteries and dry cell batteries, fluorescent bulbs, all types, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, mercury thermometers, and thermostats, elemental mercury, and electronics recycling, computer CPUs, monitors, printers, scanners, keyboards, mice, cell phones, fax machines, copiers, and television. So Joe, you've got an opportunity again, tell your neighbors on April the 6th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. With that, that concludes the chairperson's report.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept your report.
I second that motion.
Been motioned by Ms. Roscoe, supported by Ms. Talley, for approval of the chairperson's report. Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 5 is the mayor's report.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council, Madam Treasurer, Deputy Clerk, and those in the audience today and those at home watching. I'd like to draw your attention to the monitors right now for a quick message from Vanessa Toller from the Mayor's Office.
Hello, I'm Vanessa Tolliver, and here are some events happening in Romulus. Romulus is on the clock this Saturday, April 6th. Join us at the Romulus Athletic Center from 1 to 5 p.m. for a fun-filled event featuring the Detroit Lions cheerleaders and mascot Rory. Show off your football skills and race through the obstacles. Dance with our DJ and much, much more fun. All for free. Mayor McCray will present the 2024 State of the City Address at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, April 16th at Romulus High School Auditorium. Registration will begin at 4 p.m. The State of the City is free to attend. However, we do ask that you please register to attend by contacting the Mayor's Office at 734-942-7571 to confirm your attendance. Bring your neighbors, your friends, and your families out to help at the annual Clean Sweep Community Cleanup. We will meet at the Romulus Athletic Center on Saturday, April 20th at 9:30 a.m. for assignments. Bags and gloves will be provided. Afterwards, we will meet up at Blue Sky Ice Cream and Hamburgers for a sweet treat. Save the date. The 2024 Eco Fair, sponsored by the Romulus Garden Club and the Romulus Public Library on Saturday, April 27th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. This free Earth Day celebration will be hosted at the Romulus Athletic Center. You do not have to be a member to attend. Visit our website for more information. Yard waste pickup will resume the week of April 14th. Thanks everyone, and remember to like and share us on Facebook and YouTube, or visit our website for more information. And you make sure to have yourself a fabulous night.
Thank you, Vanessa. No action items tonight for council, but I do have a little bit of information for the basketball fans in our community. For those who are unaware, our former Romulus High School coach Nate Oates is coaching at the collegiate level, at the collegiate level now, and he's coaching Alabama. So he has made it to the Final Four. So we get a little bit of hometown pride there. So they're playing against, I believe, the Huskies on Saturday. So tune in and watch them, and get a little bit of a Romulus tie in the Final Four. So exciting stuff. So, and that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Number 6 is the clerk's report. There's only one action item under the clerk's report. Agenda item 6A. It is requested that council approve the second reading and final adoption to amendments to Appendix B, Chapter 38, Pension Plan of the City of Romulus Code of Ordinance. This amendment was introduced at the March 25th regular council meeting.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion for second reading and final adoption of amendments to Appendix B, Chapter 38, Pension Plan of the City of Romulus Code of Ordinances.
I second that motion.
Been motioned by Ms. Roscoe, supported by Ms. Talley, second reading and final adoption of amendments to the Appendix B, Chapter 38, Pension Plan of the City of Romulus Code of Ordinance. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, roll call vote. Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved.
Thank you, City Council. And before I close out the clerk's report, just a couple announcements. The clerk's office is now accepting applications for the Honorary Street Sign Dedication Program. This is a program to commemorate individuals who have made significant contributions to the community and humanity. Applications can be submitted online through the city's website, or you can come to the clerk's office to get a copy of that application. The application fee is $25. In addition to that, the clerk's office is also accepting registrations for the citywide spring yard sale. The dates for the citywide spring yard sale is Thursday, May 16th through Sunday, May 19th. And again, residents can register for a citywide yard sale permit online, or they can come up to the clerk office, or they can submit an email to us at clerk@romulusgov.com. And if there's any questions or comments regarding the Honorary Street Sign Dedication Program, you can contact the clerk's office at 734-942-7540, and that will conclude the clerk's report.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk.
Thank you. Number 7 is the treasurer's report.
Thank you. Good evening, council, mayor, clerk, chief of staff, listening audience. I just want to remind everybody, I've been doing income taxes for some time, and just on a personal note, that is due April 15th for those of you that have not filed yet. Just want to remind you of that. And I also want to say, good job to Ashley Capital as far as all the facts. I learned a lot. I thought you guys did wonderful. That goes for anybody that has a landfill in their community. There's a lot to learn with that and how that all operates. And now I understand why I'm picking up glass in my yard and the fact that I will be picking it up probably the rest of my life as long as I live there. So thank you for letting me know that. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Number 8 is public comment. This is the portion of the agenda for those in the audience who would like to address the city council. The rules to address the city council can be found on the back of the meeting agenda. If you would like to address the city council, please raise your hand, and after being acknowledged by the chairperson, approach the podium and state your name. Please note, members of the public who submitted a public comment card will be called upon first. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Any additional time will be upon the consent of the chairperson. Mr. Chair, I do have 2 requests to speak. The first one is from Jasmine Dancy.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm here tonight just to provide a little bit of historical context in terms of the city's firehouse building and Big Steve's designs. I know there has been lots of discussions going on, and I can't obviously speak to recent happenings as far as city operations go, but I did want to just comment on my time when I served as Director of Marketing and Community Development here for the city, and that was from early 2019 through the end of August or so of 2020. So if you guys remember, in 2019, early 2019, the city held an RFP process to seek out tenants for the firehouse building. We actually only received 1 proposal during that process, and that group wasn't even ready to provide any funding until later in 2019 or 2020. So that group was disqualified for lack of funding, which left us with no proposals. At that point, as part of our economic development team, we sought out probably approximately 10 to 11 other conversations with other local businesses, not just in Romulus, but outside our community, for other restaurateurs that had successful businesses, and maybe we were hoping that they would be interested in expanding. Those conversations happened in July and August of 2019. And none of those came to have further interest after that process. But then in September of 2019, actually September 17th, was the first time that I showed the firehouse building to Steve Harmon from Big Steve's Designs. So after showing him that building on September 17th, 2019, he turned around and submitted a first proposal to secure that building on September 26th. So that was less than 10 days later. We then received a second proposal from him on October 8th, 2019. So at that point, after having talked with several other business owners, it was really clear to us that Steve Harmon and his family were very interested and wanted to move forward in the process to get into the firehouse. He signed a letter of intent on October 25th and also paid an earnest money deposit. And we sent him the first draft of a lease agreement. We did another walkthrough of the building on October 25th, and he also had a contractor come in and walk through on October 30th of 2019. Now, between that point and when his commercial lease was approved on August 3rd of 2020, that's several months, but if you guys also remember, we had a large world event happening in the pandemic. So lots of things were happening during that time. So he had his commercial lease approved in August, but set the initial rent level at $0. There was still significant work that needed to be done, both by the city and by Big Steve as the tenant. So still a lot of work that needed to be done, but we were through the process and had good faith that this would be moving down the line. That was one of the last actions I took here at council before leaving on maternity leave. And I know that, significant things have happened since then. I know that amended lease agreements were approved in June of 2021 and then August of 2022 with the city and Big Steve. But I just wanted to provide this little bit of context and how far things have come with this local business. I know at the time that I was here, we were excited that this was going to be a business ran by a resident. That was something that we saw as a big plus. Was that 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Thank
can
you guys.
continue.
I just have
Continue.
just a little bit more to say in that I do apologize, on behalf of this process that the actual dollar amount of the taxes was not specifically written out in any of these leases. That was a mistake on my part on the city and also on Big Steve for not having that clearly, explicitly written and documented in these lease agreements. So if there was any mistake during the process, I would say that was it. But otherwise, I just hope that both parties can come to a mutually beneficial conclusion and hope the best, outcome for the city and our small business community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the next request to speak, public comment card we have is from David Hotz.
Good evening. First of all, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I would hope I can get a couple extra minutes. I got a couple of things I would like to address if possible. One of the first things I do want to talk about first is, well, it's kitten season, which means the shelters are at capacity. That also means there's a lot of unfortunate animals that get euthanized due to the fact that we have a lack of resources. And one of the things that I like to address is I had someone really close to me that taught me about valuing all life, including animals, the most vulnerable. And we do have a lot of feral animals out there that don't get the proper chance. And that was my mom, unfortunately, passed away late November. And in her memory, I'd like to ask the Romulus City Council at one point to consider adopting a TNR catch and release policy for the city of Romulus, something that hasn't been previously done. And this would help control the populations of the animals and at the same time prevent, rodent outbreak. There's certain cities that unfortunately crack down too hard, like Livonia, and now there's mice running around in daylight. And we don't want to have those kind of problems. So it would be valuable to still keep them in the ecosystem where they have a valuable place and at the same time save a lot of fur baby lives. Next of all, we just had this big talk about environmental issues. And poor Mark here, I'm probably going to drag him out to lunch so I can ask him about an hour's worth of questions on environment issues with this now. Didn't really get a chance to do this beforehand. So kind of coming in at the 11th hour, but what I do want to say is, testing is not a perfect process when it comes to environment. It was actually just 4 days ago, a CNN article, and it actually was published in a number of other publications too, Bloomberg and Fortune and so on, that talked about methane testing. And apparently, it's not being recorded properly, because what they do usually for methane testing is they're testing for a hotspot, but they're not the actual measurement of the hotspot. So we don't know how much actual methane is actually coming out of some of these sites. We just know it's a high amount. So it tends to sometimes be like a 40% difference from the reporting compared to what it actually is. And one of the things I definitely had to question them on too is because there's a lot of different stuff when I was looking at some of the paperwork on this. Unfortunately, just getting this last minute, there's hundreds of pages of environmental testing questions in this. As a matter of fact, the document I was looking at mentioned methane, 87 times. That is a lot. But there was a lot of other materials, especially metals in there. You're talking about arsenic and other things that do have severe health risks, especially due to exposure. So I would definitely like to, stress that we need to definitely consider all those things when we're talking about these environmental things. I don't know if they have another watchdog besides Eagle Watching. The testing group that when you told me tested was actually your firm that you used to work at. Now you work for these guys. I don't know if that's a conflict or not. But it is an interesting question is what other outside resources can we get for testing, monitoring, especially in these environmental issues?
I'll give you 3 more minutes.
Thank you. The other thing is this also extends to the same problem with the dump in Van Buren. And I know we talked about this about election time, and I've talked to all of you about this issue. And and the one thing that I can say about over there is, the methane may be odorless, but that dump isn't. We're talking ammonia. That's one of the biggest causes of that nasty smell that we're getting over there. Hydrogen sulfate is one of the other chemicals that's coming out of there, it causes a smell. So we are definitely being impacted by that from the Van Buren dump. And I would love to know where this administration is, because they said maybe there's some ways we can leverage them yet. I'd love to know what we've done so far on that. But these dumps do cause some severe issues, especially in long-term exposure. And one of the things I do have a question for them about too is they talked about essentially the building's a ventilation system that it's going to be venting all the stuff back out and it's going to go right up in the sky. But that doesn't mean it actually curbs the emissions. So, once you're actually kind of disturbing this land and you have all that coming up, that's all it's going to be doing is pumping it right into the sky. It's not helping the environment by any means. And does wind actually carry this? So I can tell you just by living by that dump, the wind carries. So these are valid questions that we should be asking. And the last of all, when it comes to this issue, I really feel like if we're going to be putting a place with 240 trucks, we should definitely have that road expanded. Not just a little bit with some, de-acceleration lanes and turn lanes, but E-course pretty much should be a 2-lane road as is, especially with Amazon. We already sit at that light sometimes 5 times before you can even get anywhere. So we definitely have to start having those conversations about the amount of traffic that we have in here, the damage doing to our roads. We have a state that doesn't enforce weight limits. It's definitely a concern for the public. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have no more public comment cards.
From the audience, Mr. Miller.
Good evening, Charles Miller, 11439 St. Aloysius. Through the chair to Mr. Wilson, if you would please, sir.
Yeah.
Councilman Wilson, with all due respect, sir, I see you filed to be a candidate for Wayne County Commissioner. In my opinion, you should have been refrained from accepting the seat and allow the next highest vote getter to get the seat. We will be cast into the same situation that allowed you to take your seat. I've always said it's always right to do the right thing, even when it turns out wrong. Thank you, sir.
Any other comments from the audience? Steve?
Good evening, City Council. Good evening, esteemed members of the Romulus City Council. I stand here before you as a dedicated businessman who has poured considerable time, money, and effort into revitalizing the interior and the curb appeal of the building located at 35255 Goddard Road and establishing my businesses. While I acknowledge the need to abide by regulations as a tenant, I firmly believe my lease should be handled professionally and with respect. Although my leased property is open to the public, and I am troubled by the public discussion surrounding my lease taxes and that occurs without prior notice or constitution. I'm sorry, a little nervous. This not only creates a hostile environment for my family and myself, but it also erodes the trust essential for a successful landlord-tenant relationship. I implore that any issues regarding my lease be addressed directly with me first, in a private and respectful manner. I must also highlight specific grievances about the HVAC unit. I'm sorry. Again, I'd like to address grievances with the HVAC unit. I must also highlight which caused significant financial losses and disruption in my business operations, September 13th, 2023 until October 18th, 2023. During this time, business operations stopped completely due to the HVAC installation. The delay in completing this project and ensuring compliance with building codes and the Michigan Health Department has been detrimental, resulting in subsequent income loss for all three of my businesses. I urge the city council to take, I urge the city to take responsibility for the three-year delay and work collaborative towards the resolution that benefits all parties involved. Furthermore, I wish to address the high taxes, particularly regarding the taxation of my parking lot. Despite my effort to clarify the tax assessment during the lease negotiation and thereafter, I was blindsided exuberantly by an exuberant tax bill in 2022 on the building and the parking lot, which taxes on the building was never mentioned. The tax dollar amount on the building was never mentioned. May I continue?
Continue.
Okay. I urge City Council to review and reconsider the taxation policy regarding 35255 Goddard Road. In conclusion, I urge the City Council to address my concern earnestly and work towards mutual beneficial solutions on both landlord and tenant. I am a law-abiding citizen committed to the prosperity of this city. I believe that my lease deserves treatment and respect and professionalism that is warranted. Thank you for your time. I eagerly await your insight and please on this pressing matter. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
We will address yours on the unfinished business. Okay. Any other comments from the audience? If there's no other comments from the audience, Deputy Clerk, close that part out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 9 is unfinished business.
John?
Mr. Wadsworth.
The Mayor, this is business that's always unfinished, but the railroad tracks in downtown are terrible. They're horrible.
Agreed. Numerous complaints, and we're going through, Roberto's going through process right now on CSX and them.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Thank you.
we're aware and doing all we
Thank you.
can.
There's no more unfinished business. Number 10 is new business.
Through the chair, if I could.
Ms. Talley?
There was a passing on actually Good Friday of a classmate of mine. We went to school together, Tracy Klein. Their family had been in Romulus for years. His mom and dad passed many years ago, and he still was here in the city of Romulus. I would like to get support for a memorial resolution for Tracy Klein.
Support.
It's been motioned by Ms. Talley, supported by Ms. Williams for memorial resolution. Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like two.
Ms. Williams?
Yeah, and I have two. Arthur Roberts, Hamilton. I'm sure a lot of folks is aware of Mr. Hamilton. I would like to ask for a resolution for Mr. Hamilton.
Support.
It's been motioned by Ms. Williams, supported by Ms. Abdo for resolution. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved. Ms. Williams?
And also Ellery Scott, he's been a Romulus resident, a lifelong Romulus resident. He actually had a business where he did landscaping, and he passed away this last Friday, well-known in the city of Romulus. Definitely give his family my condolence and prayers.
I'll support that.
Been motioned by Ms. Williams, supported by Ms. Abdo for resolution. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved.
Are there any more new business from council? Number 11 is communications.
Through the chair, just a
Ms.
couple of
Talley.
things. So first of all, I would like to announce that the First Baptist is getting in preparation for their church anniversary coming up in May. They're doing a fish fry on Saturday, April 20th, from 12 to 4 at First Baptist Church, located at 11412 Delano Street, Romulus. Dinners is $14, sandwiches $13. It'll be catfish and perch, so please support our First Baptist here in the city of Romulus. I do want to shout out for Ms. Abdo. I have been talking about reports and stuff. She has sent the council reports on the rec commission and for the cemetery board update, so I just want to thank you for those. And just also, we just left out of Resurrection Weekend, Palm Sunday, Holy Week. We started really the weekend with Good Friday. We had a great Good Friday walk. Our fearless leader is Reverend Willis, who has been doing this walk for many, many years. I just want to shout out some of the characters that was portrayed on the walk and the people who portrayed them. Our own mayor, thank you. He was Disciple Matthew. Thank you, thank you. We had Person of the Year, David Jones, who was Judas. We had Deacon Emery Long from First Baptist Church, who was John the Baptist. We had our Parks and Rec Director, Colleen Dumas, who was Martha. We had Lana Burgard, who was Mary Magdalene. We had Gail Mispa, who was Pilate's wife. We had Pastor Love, who was Lazarus. His wife, Sister Love, was a pregnant Elizabeth. We had Miss Gail Mispa's grandchildren, who were children surrounding Jesus. We had Peter, and we had Mother Mary. They were members of Pastor Willis's church. And then finally, someone who wanted to step up to play Jesus. Everybody been running from playing Jesus, Mayor. And we had Pastor Bob Harper, who stepped into the role as Jesus, and if I missed anybody, forgive me, but he stepped into the role of playing Jesus for the Good Friday walk. I just want to shout out to everybody, and thank you, Treasurer, for showing up. She did the walk. Maybe we'll get her to do Mother Mary next year. You know I'm going to get you. But anyway, but no, you came out and supported, so thank you very much. And you always have supported with the Mother Mary character, so thank you. And everybody that came out to support the Good Friday walk, and it led into a magnificent resurrection weekend for me, and I hope it's the same for everybody else as well. Very important time in history, and just not one to be forgotten. So just thank you for everybody and I hope everybody enjoyed their resurrection weekend. And then finally, I just want to say that our Sheets is moving along really nicely. If you haven't been over Vining and Wick Road, go check it out. I just want to say our city is progressing along. Our city is very progressing. Mayor, to your staff and yourself and your team, thank you for moving our city along, and I'm excited about the things to come in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would just like to remind those residents out there, those in the audience, and also those that are viewing, that Forgotten Harvest will be at the high school tomorrow, starting at 10 to 12. You have to be in the line by 12 o'clock to be served. Anyone that shows up, we'll serve them. All you need is your name, your address, and your birthday. I would just like to say, I know, and it's not personal, and I hope it's not taken personal, but the city was not wrong in not making sure that at that time, Jasmine Dancy was clear on making sure all the information. I just don't want to send it out to the general public that's watching that we as the city misled or did something wrong. When you sign a contract, you have to make sure you understand what you're signing. That's all I'm saying. And so it's not the city's fault, maybe the pandemic and it held things up for the HVAC, but pertaining to what was in that contract, it was signed and agreed to, and it's not a fault on the city. I just want to make that clear, because I've already got texts saying, why did the city mislead them? That was not a fault of this particular city, of that contract being signed or being misled about the property tax, personal property tax. It was in that contract, it was signed and agreed to. So I just wanted to be clear with that. Thank you.
On this subject here, I think that we should kind of like slow it down on personal business tax, explain other people's business to the audience. That's all, I just want to say that. Again, I want to say thank you, Ashley Capital, for what you do to clean up the situation. And I think you did a good job. And what we want to do is continue, I know you're in the, listening to experts that know their job or what to do, so appreciate your concern for the city. That's all I have.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
To piggyback on just what you said about Ashley Capital tonight, I just want to make it totally clear that what we voted on tonight was just the buildings. All the other information you give us tonight, it was already going to happen, whether you built 2 big buildings or whether they built 15 small buildings. The environmental part of it, the Brownsfield, Ecorse Road, all those different things, all that was still going to happen. The only thing we technically approved tonight was the fact that we're allowing them to build 2 buildings instead of them having to build 10 or 15 small buildings. But thank you again for all that extra information.
Thank you.
John,
Mr. Wadsworth.
if I could to Ashley Capital, even though I voted against your project, I wish developers would, in the past, would have been upfront as you fellas were here tonight. What you said was excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
There's no more communications from council. That brings us to number 12, adjournment. The time is 9:32.
So moved.
Support.
A motion by Mr. Wadsworth, supported by Ms. Abdo, for adjournment. Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. We are adjourned. Thank you.